First speaker, Alice Ting, Vice President of New York Times.
Good morning. My voice doesn't carry very well, so if you are having trouble hearing me, please raise your hand and I'll try to speak a little louder. I think I have like 3 mics on me, so hopefully that will do the trick. It's a pleasure to be here today. I oversee content licensing and syndication for the New York Times. I've been doing it for a number of years. Been with the New York Times for about 17 years, which I know sounds pretty remarkable these days. And I'm here today really to talk about some of the things we've done in the content licensing space. My job primarily is to take assets that we own and squeeze every penny out of it. Things we invest a lot of money in our reporting, but are there other ways for us to monetize that content beyond advertising and subscription? And this cover shows, I don't know if you've seen this photo, this is actually a photo that was taken by Tyler Hicks, one of our renowned photojournalists for the New York Times that won the 2016 Pulitzer Prize, and it's just one of many assets that we own that we try to monetize. So in terms of content licensing or licensing in general, pretty much when you allow someone to license your content or your assets, you're giving a third party permission to do something with it, a specific use or a wide variety of uses. So by show of hands, how many folks here have a content licensing program where they're actually licensing their content out to third parties? So not many. How many are interested in doing that and trying to find ways to monetize? Okay, great, thank you. So what I'm going to do today is talk about some of the things we've done at the New York Times, give you some examples of how we've been able to monetize. Hopefully that will be very relevant to you, and talk about some of the things we've learned along the way. It's been a very long journey for us. It's not like we started doing this just yesterday. We've been actually doing it for decades, but it has not been a smooth ride, to say the least. So the first thing is understanding what you own. And at the New York Times, our core assets, we're very fortunate because we've been around since 1851 to own a wide variety of assets. That includes everything from our articles, our text, to our photography. We don't own all of it, but we own a good portion of it. Our video, that's the video that you see online, plus our 360 video, our VR video, audio, graphics. We also license out our brand. We own that, and that's not just the New York Times, but various sub-brands within our family. And then in terms of content, most people think of us as breaking news, international news, political news, but we also do a lot of writing around reviews, whether it's technology reviews, wine reviews, we do travel reviews, we have a huge database of recipes, and all those things add up to significant assets that we can repackage and monetize. As some of you may or may not know, we have a worldwide distribution both in print and digital. We currently have about 105 million unique visitors globally. Our audience globally is actually growing at a much faster clip than our audience domestically. But we are a subscription-first business, and what that really means is that everything is about our customer, our reader. That was not necessarily the case 5-10 years ago, where advertising pretty much was the primary revenue driver for the New York Times, with circulation revenue, subscription revenue being a close second. That has flipped. We recently had a press release that said that for the first quarter of this year, our digital subscription growth has been the highest it's been in history. We were able to attract over 300,000 new digital subscriptions to the New York Times just in the first quarter, beating out the fourth quarter last year, which was at the time our greatest. And that's attributed to a number of sophisticated things we're doing from a digital marketing perspective, but also we are getting the effects of what they're calling the Trump bump from President Trump. So we're having good benefits from that, but at the end of the day, we're a subscription-first business. Doesn't mean that advertising doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that content licensing doesn't matter. It just means everything that we do at the end has to focus on our customers. So, as I mentioned, content licensing supports our core purpose. We license both our content and non-New York Times content for both editorial and commercial use. And as I mentioned in the first slide, we do have all these assets. And we can easily just say, here, take an article, take our entire feed, do whatever you want with it. But we find that there's a lot of value in analyzing our content and then creating packages to meet the various needs of our target customers. When we first started doing a lot of this, when the program started, our primary customer were other traditional media companies for obvious reasons. We invest a lot of money in our news bureaus, and not every newspaper or media organization can do that, and so we have content that's relevant for them to use to help supplement their own reporting. But over time, we have expanded beyond that and now target also non-traditional media, corporations, universities, brands, service businesses, and anyone else that we think could benefit from having our content or is interested in supplementing their content with ours. And what we do is we create different packages, whether it's our entire newswire, which is very similar to the Associated Press. Here's all our content, take it, put it in your paper, do whatever you want with it. Well, not whatever you want with it, but do certain things with it, pick and choose, or we're going to create set content feeds, which are specific to certain topical areas, which are of interest of the time. So climate change is a very popular topic right now, and so creating a special feed for customers for that, or even customized feeds, depending on the relationship that we have. We also license our magazine, so we have a lifestyle magazine that's published 13 times a year. It's inserted in our paper. And we license not only individual articles, but we license the entire magazine, including the brand, globally, because we think there's an opportunity there to get our lifestyle content out there, which is something people, once again, don't think about as much versus our political and our international news. We also have a very small but reliable business around film options where when you're doing storytelling, that makes sometimes for good movies, right? Because movies are all about storytelling. So we do have a lot of interest from studios in Hollywood that want to option our articles to build movies around those. And then finally, we had the standard rights and permissions business, which is very transactional. I'm interested in this one review. I'm interested in one article to post on my site or my newsletter. I want to pay you a few $100s, a few $1,000s for it. Small transactions, but as a whole, could be a significant amount of revenue. And we push this all out to our target customer base in three ways. One is we have a sales team that does this, and I'll talk a little bit about how we've grown that team. And then we also partner with outside parties because, frankly, we're not experts in certain target markets. So, for instance, we have so much stuff in our archives that never gets used again. And so we've worked with companies like ProQuest where they take our content and they create packages for the education market and the library market, which is something that they're well known for. We also partner with agencies that do rights and permissions because frankly, we don't want our sales staff doing the small transactions. We'd rather have an agency doing it because they have the staff and the expertise and those relationships. And we partner with CCC, Copyright Clearance Center, because they represent so many other publishers and they create products that then could target an audience that we don't have necessarily relationships with as well. So we work both internally as well as externally. And then the third piece is what I call platforms. And I put an asterisk around that because that's not going to be the focus of my presentation. We do things with Apple News and Google and Facebook. And those are really more for strategic reasons, not necessarily for making revenue per se, though they do. But a lot of that is really more for strategic reasons, and that's done actually by a separate group. And they're better off talking about that than I am. But I'll focus on the first two. In addition to the New York Times content I mentioned, we also syndicate other content. So we do represent over 30 other publications and brands and commentary. And we actually then create offerings from those. And the reason why we do this is because we want to round out our portfolio. Even though we cover a wide breadth of topics, we don't have the depth necessarily in every single topic. And it's nice to have these additional partners that we represent, and we're out there also licensing their content and syndicating their content to a lot of our clients as well as new clients. But we can't really do this without a lot of resources and support. So right now we have over 35 dedicated individuals in this group. We are separate from the rest of the organization in the sense that we're an autonomous group. We even have an editorial staff that is completely separate from the newsroom so that the newsroom can focus on the primary job at hand, which is reporting, and our group can focus on editing, ingesting the content from our partners as well as ourselves, repackaging the content, re-editing it, finding new partners, and so forth. And so it's important to have those resources to do what you can do because, as I mentioned earlier, we are not the primary revenue driver. Remember, we're a subscription-first business. So to have these resources helps us to grow the business. Our staff is spread out over 8 locations globally, with the primary staff being in New York. The other locations are mostly sales and sales operations focused. And we think of our sales in 4 regions, US, Canada, Latin America, APAC, and then EMEA, which is Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And we have most likely over 1,000 clients once you consider some of the work that we do with third parties. But it's critical for us to make this program a success because we have the resources to do it, and that's by choice. Whether you're thinking about expanding your current content licensing business outside the U.S. into other new geographic markets, or starting a new content licensing business, this process helps us. So I'm not saying this is the process that you must use, but this is the process that has helped us in evaluating markets. Planning, which the pre-planning is important because before you spend all your time assessing opportunities and markets and hiring people, you need to find out what your objectives are and also determine what assets that you own, because that could really kind of screw things up if you're way down the line and you figure you actually don't own a lot of assets. Once that's done, assessing the opportunity through the normal means of, okay, what is the market that's growing for us? Where are the opportunities where our content makes sense, where we see a possible need in the marketplace? And then what products do we want to create out of our content? As I mentioned earlier, we can just provide raw data, raw content to clients, but when you put some value add into it, you can charge premium prices, you can find new opportunities that your competitors may not have. And so what products do you want to develop then that you want to sell? I think also then an important question is, what are the competencies that you have that can help you be successful in this market? So you may have as sales folks. Selling content is very different from selling advertising. So trying to find out how to transition folks that way is good, or finding an expert to come in that knows the market is also important. Better to kind of bring the experts in rather than try to build from scratch, helps save a lot of time and money. And then how are you going to enter the market? You're going to build it from scratch? You're going to put someone in the marketplace? Are you going to partner with someone? Are you going to hire a consulting firm? There are a lot of options to do that. And then it's repeat, revise often, and very often. And so a lot of times we will do that. We will get out of markets that are not successful or unprofitable. Some markets that we thought were growth markets, and we went in and got all these clients and then realized the problem is they can't pay us. So we had to get out. And so this constant just monitoring every market so that we know that we're in the right place and it's aligned with what our goals are. So what I'll do is I'll quickly go through each of them so that we have enough time for questions. So the first, as I said, pre-planning. Ask yourself, why do you want to license or syndicate your content, either domestically or internationally? And even though it's last on the list, it actually should be first. The first thing you want to do is, what assets do I own? And then ask it again, because you think you may own it, but you actually may not. And if you own in the US, if you own your trademark in the US, you may not necessarily own it outside of the US. So that's really important. And then understand what you think your value of the content is. Are you the only one creating this content in the marketplace? If so, you have tremendous value. If your content is more of a commodity-based content, then obviously the value will be reflected in the price. Once you're done with that and you have that inventory of your assets, and it could be anything, including your trademark, then determine what your overall goals are. Is it really about making money, or is your larger goal about supporting subscriptions or advertising or something to that effect? Because that will dictate how you staff up and as well as how you price. And there's some other questions here as well. Are you your risk tolerance? Are you willing to invest? Those are important too. But the first two questions I think are the most important to ask yourself before you start doing all this work. For the New York Times, we license content for a number of reasons. One is really to support the core mission. And to help develop audience. I would say that the audience development piece is not as strong as it used to be because our staff is much better at digital marketing. We're doing a lot with social media, so we can develop the audience actually without licensing. For many years, a lot of international readers first first experience with the New York Times was through content licensing, because they read something that we produced in another newspaper or another newsletter in their language. Today, we obviously have a lot more resources at our hand that we can actually get to that audience much more directly. We also want to make money, so licensing is extremely, in our view, profitable revenue stream. Because primarily you're retaking something you've already invested in and just repackaging it and selling it. So it's something that we're happy with the margins that it provides to us, and it's a business that continues to be profitable and I would say growing steadily, not in huge numbers, but a nice solid business. On the secondary perspective, we also do licensing because it helps to provide market intelligence, what's going in those specific geographic markets. And then finally, we have global clients, whether they're advertising or other, that we want to be able to serve, and then we don't want to limit ourselves just to the United States. So how do you determine what markets to enter? And this could be either geographic or industry or both. What we normally do is we take a look at a number of different data points. From the external perspective, we look at country economic data, what countries are growing. So we look at GDP growth. We also are interested in internet penetration. Education levels are really important because the type of person that reads the New York Times tends to be more educated. We also look at English language proficiency in the country. So for us, as we were thinking about going outside the U.S., the English language countries were the obvious low-hanging fruit for us because we publish in English. But if there's high English proficiency, even though it's not the first language, it's a attractive market for us. We also look at what obviously our competitors are doing. If there's a lot of activity in certain areas, we'll be monitoring that as a way, as a potential for us to look into specific markets. And we go to conferences because sometimes you get a lot of information there about what people are doing, and that helps in giving us sort of direction on places that we want to invest more of our time and effort. Internally, and many of you probably have this, you also have a lot of internal data. Where are your readers reading? What content are they reading? Where are they coming from? We know that 30% of our traffic to our site is from outside the U.S. and which countries are the most popular for us. So that's kind of where we're going to start first and then filter from there. Obviously, we can't boil the ocean, so we need to prioritize our efforts. And what we do is we try to identify the key criteria that makes the most sense for us, which is the English language proficiency, the internet penetration, and growth. One of the things we've learned a bit about is sort of this trade-off between the emerging markets and the mature markets. So the U.S. and Western Europe, we have many clients in those markets, and it's a very mature. The markets are very mature. But it's a solid business. It's a large business, but it's not growing. And so our strategy in supporting those markets are very different from markets such as China, which is both a growth opportunity for us and an extreme challenge for us because, as the New York Times, we are completely blocked in China, both our Chinese language site as well as our English language site. So it just means that we have to work extra hard to get our content distributed because, frankly, a lot of people won't speak to us because of who we are. So we focus on content that is less controversial when we're licensing, and that helps us grow in that market. And it's one of our largest markets right now. Brazil used to be an amazing market for us a number of years ago, and as you probably know, the economy and the government instability has not helped that country. In addition to the rising dollar, the strength of the dollar has hurt us significantly, not only in Brazil, but in Latin America. So that market now is extremely challenged for us. Like I said before, two years ago was great, now it's terrible. It's the constant monitoring. We actually have individuals in our Brazil office in Sao Paulo, and it's really tough for them to try to sell business. But we continue to monitor and talk to people because when that market turns around, we'll be there supporting our clients, and hopefully they'll continue to license content from us. So we think about those markets, and we're constantly changing it. For now, most of our focus is on Asia and Africa, which is everyone's talking about Africa. Everyone who licenses content, at least from the B2C side, is talking about Africa, but no one's figured it out. It's also not they're not paying premium prices. So if you're out there selling things for a high price, you're going to have to adjust for that market. And it's also a market where, we have been burned once or twice, where we've gotten into agreement and the rules are not followed, bills are not paid. And so just being able to just flex to that is really important. We're still bullish on Africa. We think we could do more. It's just going to take a little longer for us than we expected. In terms of finding areas of opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, what you want to do is see what you can do with your content so you can meet the needs, meet any unmet needs. For us, we found that certain content does really well in a lot of the markets, and this is, these are most of the clients are taking content. They have B2C, they have individual consumers reading it. So for instance, you have business is always popular, business news and data. Science is very popular, lifestyle and health, wellness, it has become extremely popular. You would think that politics and news is really popular these days. The interesting thing about President Trump is we thought that would give us a bump on the licensing. It's been sort of a good thing and a bad thing. We haven't seen much of a bump because many of our clients are investing more of their resources in covering President Trump, whereas we thought they wouldn't do that and they would want our content. So we're seeing, more, we're not seeing the effect that we thought on the licensing side, but at the same time, what we are seeing is that people are starting to appreciate us for things outside of just general news. The types of content, anything digital, video is really hot. The problem with video is that no one knows how to monetize it. So even though you're trying to license video and people want it, they don't really want to pay you for it. Or they want to do a rev share, but they're not really because they're having trouble monetizing it. Your rev share is like $1, so it's not really worthwhile. And so you have to think creatively of how to get that content out there and make some money from it. Anything interactive and anything around data is really great right now and very popular. What I'm going to do is play for you an example of a deal that we did in Brazil. And as I mentioned, obviously Brazil is not a great market for us, but we were able to find an opportunity there where Grupo Bandeiras, or Grupo Band, is the second largest media conglomerate in Brazil. They own a number of different properties, including cable channels, and they were interested in creating a show, an arts and culture show, and they looked at our archive of videos and loved what they saw. These are videos that we haven't used in years, and created a weekly 30-minute show from it that won an industry award at the end of last year and has attracted many advertisers. So they've been able to monetize. It's a great example, I think, of being able to take content that has sort of disappeared and bring it back in a way that works, because we weren't able to find another way to sell video, and this is one way. So it's in Portuguese, so I apologize. There is some subtitling, but it's really just introducing the channel, and you'll see the host that's going to be doing the introduction. Oh, wrong way.
A partir de novembro, eu, Marina Persson, vou estar aqui no Arte 1 para apresentar uma seleção dos melhores conteúdos audiovisuais do The New York Times. O primeiro canal especializado em arte do Brasil, agora junto com um dos grupos editoriais mais respeitados do mundo.
The biggest laugh has to be at the end.
This film is going to be a close-up, a portrait.
Magazine Arte 1 com The New York Times. Uma vez por semana a gente se encontra para falar de cinema, artes visuais, teatro, literatura, design, arquitetura, moda, gastronomia. E tem ainda entrevistas com grandes estrelas e coberturas dos principais eventos internacionais.
This is what art is about.
Arte 1 e The New York Times juntos a partir de novembro.
She's the hostess. So we've been very happy with this partnership. Obviously, our licensee is very happy with it. We're always happy when our clients are happy, and they want to do more with us. And so they also own a 24-hour news cable network, and that's another project that we are working with them. But once again, it's taking bits of our content and licensing it out in areas that we normally wouldn't get a lot of traction. Once you know what content packages you want to create, what markets you want to enter, the question is what are your strengths and weaknesses? How are you going to how are you going to do this? So you have the people that can actually make it happen. For the New York Times, when we were thinking about content licensing, obviously we have our brand recognition globally that helps. We have quality content that helps to stand out among our competitors. We have an existing internal sales force, which is always a nice thing to have. We also have a tech platform where we ingest a lot of the content, not for ourselves, but also our partners, and then able to deliver that content to almost any client in any format. So asking those questions where you need the help and how you're going to get it is really important. This example here, Modern Love, I don't know if many of you know Modern Love, but Modern Love is a weekly column on love and relationships. It's been around since 2004. It's edited by the talented Dan Jones, and it's been primarily in print and digital. And we have a treasure trove of articles and about love and relationship. And we were approached by WBUR, a station outside of Boston, to create a podcast for Modern Love, a different platform, just basically reusing what we have in audio format. We bring in celebrities to actually read some of the columns, and then there is a postscript interview that talks a little bit about, okay, now what's happened since you've written this column. And so it's done really well for us, and I don't know if we can play the audio.
Let's face it, when have you ever been in a relationship that's gone as planned?
Sometimes I think about the vows my wife and I made to each other 28 years ago, and we're different people than we once were.
And I don't even like him. He's a liar. I can't spend the rest of my life with him.
This project is a collaboration between the New York Times and WBUR Boston, bringing Modern Love's essays to life with help from some of your favorite voices.
Hi, this is Jason Alexander.
Hey, it's January Jones.
Hey, this is Emmy Rossum.
Modern Love, the podcast. Stories of love, loss, and redemption. Subscribe today on iTunes.
So in the case of Modern Love, when I debuted on iTunes, I actually debuted on #1. We were pretty shocked, and we didn't realize the following it had. I think we knew from a readership perspective, but not from an audio perspective. And then to date, at least as of end of last year, we've had over 12 million downloads. So another example of taking what you own and finding ways to extract more value out of it. Our partner WBUR is very happy with this partnership. The revenue has exceeded their expectations and our expectations. And it also is part of a portfolio of podcasts that now we also produce in-house. We decided to work with BUR primarily because they have the expertise in audio production. I mean, they've been doing it for a long time, and that was the impetus for us to go with them rather than doing it ourselves. But we've then gained a lot of knowledge from working with them to be able to also create our own program. Once all this is done, then the question is, how do you enter the market? And this is where it gets really tricky, because the devil is really in the details. Do you do this yourself? Obviously, do you partner? There are legal implications. Working in France is very different from working in Singapore. Besides tax implications, there's lots of labor laws that are very different and sometimes more restrictive than in the United States. We learned it a bit the hard way. And being able to know those legal ramifications are really important. I would say I'm sure you guys all know this, just hire a lawyer, hire the best counsel you can. I love the lawyers at the New York Times because their job is to protect the New York Times, and they're very knowledgeable about a lot of the markets. And if they're not, we go to the outside counsel in each of those markets to help us guide so that we don't make mistakes if something doesn't go right, or we obviously don't want to break any laws either. Besides the legal implications, the operational piece. Are you going to have this all from your headquarters, wherever that is, or are you going to have folks located in the country that you want to do business in? Or how are you going to deliver your content? What's the content management solution? What's the process in place in case you don't own the asset, but you actually want to own the assets? How will you clear your rights? Who's going to do that for you? Who's going to manage all this? I mean, these are little things that people don't think about, that sometimes once the program starts, someone winds up inheriting all this, and it becomes a bit of, this poor person is overloaded. And we've had that happen. And we're at the point now where we don't. We have a process in place. It's taking years. We even have contract templates. We have a place where our sales force we use Salesforce, where they put all the contracts and all their information. It used to be in different places. Each country had a different system. system. Everything's now centralized. Also, what's important once you decide the product is how you're going to price it, because one price doesn't fit all. Are you going to use a rate card, or are you just going to go in and, depending on how the negotiations go, come up with the pricing? Sales, once again, are you going to hire salespeople? Are you going to outsource this? Are you going to have them in the country or not is also critical. And then in terms of how you're going to market it, because the sales folks will need presentations and a lot of materials to help support what they need to do. What's on the slide here are our T magazines, a lifestyle magazine that I mentioned earlier that's published 13 times a year. We really wanted to expand globally. The problem is that we don't have expertise in select markets. So we have 5 local editions outside the US, one in China, one in Japan, Spain, Singapore, and Qatar. They're all in language, and so what we decided to do, rather than do it ourselves, is to license and partner with local magazine publishers who have expertise in the local market, not only in terms of the language, but in terms of the trends and what subjects are important, as well as what individuals might make sense for that market. A celebrity in the United States may not necessarily translate to a celebrity in China or in Qatar. So we work with them, and they license the content from us as well as the brand, but they stick to our brand guidelines, so everything still looks very much like the New York Times. The last couple of things is really around things that one doesn't think about or sometimes gets overlooked when you are entering into specifically markets outside the US. And one of the things we learn is all about local customs and business etiquette. It goes such a long way. I mean, we sometimes take for granted, English is sort of the language of the business world, right? And the assumption is everyone can speak English, and many countries people can speak English as their second language. And even though they can, a lot gets lost in translation. And so if you speak the foreign language, it goes such a long way in being able to speak the foreign language. I don't speak a foreign language, so it makes it a little bit more challenging for me. But what I try to do is learn a few phrases wherever I go. And we do have, the nice thing is our staff, which are located locally, speak the language. So we always have translators on staff. And we find that it's better to have translators and speak in the local language than to try to speak in English, unless their English is impeccable and they want to do it. One of the things I learned early on when I went to Latin America was we were launching a product with a client, and I was going to give a little thank you speech, and it was in English. But everyone there spoke Spanish, including my staff, they're bilingual. And I was just made a comment, I wish that I could speak Spanish because I think it would go a long way. And someone on the team suggested translating the first paragraph of the speech into Spanish, and for me to read that in Spanish and then go right into the English. So we decided to do that. I had to practice a lot because there was one word that was screwing me up a bit. If I had pronounced it wrong, I was going to insult them rather than say something nice. So I was a little bit nervous, but it worked out really well. And I had a translator during the event, and he said to me, I don't think you hear this, but people were really impressed that you tried to speak the language, and they were really happy you did that, because sometimes people come in and just assume that English is it. Now, they all had translation headphones on, so they were getting the English translated later on, but just that one little paragraph made a difference in the relationship, made a difference in some of the advertisers that were there on behalf of our client, and it's just those little things make a big difference. I always say that it's good to know the country's history before you go in. There are subjects that are taboo that we may think are okay because we're a little bit more open in our conversation. So knowing that, I also find it's also good to know what's going on in the current news environment of a country, because that helps to break the ice. Things such as even greetings, for instance. Do you shake hands? Latin America, if you are very private, don't want your personal space, interrupted, you're going to have to get used to them kissing you hello a lot. People that you don't know, they come to you, they kiss you twice, and you just have to be okay with that. It's a very social culture. Everything revolves around food and getting to know you personally, because that helps in the business conversation. Lots of eating. In Japan, obviously a lot more formal, and it also depends on whether you're talking to a more traditional company versus a digital startup, which will be probably more like a little more laid back, a little less formal. So knowing these little things makes a big difference. The deal terms and contracts also, I find that it's easy to kind of let the lawyers take care of that, but if you're the business person handling those that negotiation, make sure that the deal terms are not vague and that they're very narrow. A good example is I inherited a number of contracts when I started, and some of the language was, we will give you rights and we will give you digital rights. These were contracts done in 1997. Well, back then, digital was maybe the website, but what else does digital encompass today? Tablet, mobile, video, ebooks. You're basically giving away all your rights today. And if you have a 10 or 20-year contract, which is something we move away from now, long-term contracts, you have now just given someone all your rights and gotten no additional compensation back in return. So the more narrow you can be in terms of your deal terms and the way you strike the deal, the better for you, and also know the value of your content. Every use, you should get more money out of the client. Other two areas which are good is QA and termination. QA is quality assurance. We're control freaks at the New York Times. We're very controlling about how our brand is used, how our content is used, who's doing the editing and excerpting. Everything has to be approved by us. That's us, as I said, control freaks. But for you might have more flexibility, but put a process in place in the contract that allows you to override or veto anything that you may not find acceptable. At the end of the day, it's your brand and your content, and only you can protect it. And then finally, termination. So when you're dating, you're about to get married, the last thing you want to talk about is how to divide the assets when you get divorced, right? So, but this is the time to do it because deals go south, things don't work out, the market doesn't pan out, and you want to end a relationship in a good note. And so talking about how you're going to terminate. Obviously, there's breach, which is a whole separate thing, but sometimes you just want to terminate because your strategy has changed, or their strategy changed, or everybody was wrong on the growth of the market, and you just want to get out. It's important to talk about how you're going to terminate and who incurs what cost when that happens. And then finally, the exit strategy. Everyone gets excited when they enter a new market. How much is it going to cost us? Who are we going to hire? What are we going to do? And then later on, when you discover it's not working, you realize it's actually more expensive to exit the country than to stay in the country. So once again, think about that as you're creating your content licensing businesses. And I know I'm over, I'm sorry. So the last thing I just want to say, some final thoughts. Licensing, we found, can be a very profitable revenue stream. Understand where it fits in your larger strategy. Is it going to be primary driver, or is it supporting other goals and initiatives? Determine what kind of resources and investment you want to put into the business. There are many ways to do it. If you don't want to do it yourself because you're a little nervous about it, there are lots of consultants out there that can help you identify the value and the opportunity. Also talk to other people who've done it, because obviously at these conferences it's all about knowledge sharing and best practices. Make sure that you have very specific plans. If you're entering multiple regions, obviously one plan doesn't fit all. Regions are very, very different in the way they work, countries as well. Make sure you have the process. The operations piece always gets sort of like the short end of the stick. Make sure you have something that's very common, that you have a process in place, templates, everyone's operating under the same rules and guidelines, including your licensees. Because otherwise, if you don't have that, people will interpret things the way they want to interpret it, and it will cause a lot of mess and unproductive work, which we've also learned the hard way. Know, as you enter into each of the markets, what's going on in those markets, as well as the business etiquette. There's a lot of business that's get done informally. We found in Japan, a lot of times, the actual negotiation happens at the junior level when they go out for drinks. The senior people go away, they have dinner, but like the junior people are out drinking, having fun, and they're making the deals happen, which is fine, and that's the way it works, and then you all come together, and just knowing those things are helpful to get things done. And finally, what does it cost to enter a market, but more importantly, what does it cost to exit a market if things don't work out? And I think that's it. I'm open for questions, or I'm sorry I went over.
Microsoft, Google, and Apple tripping over each other to try establishing themselves with the younger kids so that when they leave, they'll be used to using their ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And I know that New York Times has had a strategy towards schools in the past, probably still does. It's evolved. And I'm kind of wondering how you see that area of education and
education. So education's a big opportunity. We've been in the education space for a long time in various ways. We have our readers can contribute when they go on vacation. They can contribute the value of the paper during the time they're on vacation to a fund that then supplies subscriptions or papers to college students. We now have this new initiative where people are donating money to help supply more of that into the education space. We also try to work with other education companies to the extent that it makes sense. When the Common Core came out, we thought there was a big opportunity for us because Common Core is really about nonfiction content, and we've talked to various partners about that. But we find that working with a broad selection of companies helps us in terms of getting our content out there. Because one of our goals, of course, is the new generation of New York Times readers, right? I think a lot of publishers today struggle with this younger audience. Everyone's very hot on the millennials, and we want to continue building that. And so if you can do it through education, that's great. We have a number of products that are in the education space. One is Upfront Magazine, which is a licensing agreement with Scholastic. They take our content, they take our brand, they create a sort of a new sub-brand. They have experience in the education space. They have all the contacts in the school districts. We have the content that makes sense, and they sell these subscriptions to the schools. And it's a long-standing partnership that does well for them and does well for us with very little work. Pretty much I think we do maybe an hour work a year in that relationship. But it also, I think the other thing we've done on our own side, brand side, is we've partnered with Cambridge Information Group, which is the parent to Procrest, to create the New York Times School the New York Times, which right now we have a summer academy program targeted to high school students where they come in and learn about various topics. And it has far exceeded our expectations because the content is interesting, teaches high school students how to write and write about themselves. Many of them are preparing to write for college, right? So in college essays, you have to write about yourself. So we try to partner with as many people because we think that education as a space is really important. And selfishly, we want to find we want that audience. We want them to know the brand, we want them to appreciate it, appreciate the content, and to become loyal readers later on. The money we make is fine, but it's not necessarily going to break the bank anytime soon. It's really about, once again, the subscription business.
Alice, when you license, in particular, the New York Times Magazine, is that a straight licensing fee? Is it a rev share, a combination? Sure. And if a rev share, can you at least give us an idea of what the split would be?
Yeah, I can't give specific details on individual, but I can give you a sense of a revenue model. So most of the time it's a licensing fee, either per month or per year. The fee will vary depending if we can lock them into a 1 or 2 or 3 year contract. And in some cases, we will also add on a revenue share. So in the case of magazine licensing, our preference is to do a licensing fee, or what we sometimes consider like a minimum guarantee, plus a revenue share. The percentages vary depending on the country, and I would say it's been going down because the market industry has been seeing a downward pressure on the revenue share. It's probably anywhere now from 8 to 12%. When I say revenue share, it's everything that they make from the brand and the content. So whether it's advertising, subscriptions, if they create events, anything that they do would be included as part of that revenue.
Alice, that's all the time we have, so I will ask you to join me in a big round of applause for Alice.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.